Thanks to Davidson and Company for including me in the presentation on the agenda, and of course all of you for showing up. With the onset of Halloween, I was kind of doing some thinking this morning. I'm not a Halloween guy. My kids have changed costumes about 10 times in the last week of what they're going to do, but I thought, I wonder, if I was to go, what would I go as? And, I guess I kind of thought about it from a work perspective, and so my staff might think Darth Vader. He's just like the dark leader. My mom might think, the Cape Crusader. But I kind of think of myself more as Dumbledore, as like the guy who knows all and wish he didn't know. So anyway, and then this is where my kids would say, well, you put the dumb in Dumbledore. Anyway, so jumping right in, in my presentation, I want to cover off the concept of the ultimate goal of the new rules is really better MD&A. And however lofty and nebulous that sounds, it is truly the goal. So rather than come up and just run through each requirement in that, I want to give you a bit of background of where we landed, why we landed there, and some of the other considerations we had in coming up with the new rules for MD&A, specifically focused today on looking at the MD&A and quarterly highlights. I'm a big believer in that the majority of decisions we make in our lives are kind of cost-benefit. And kind of going back to the Halloween theme, I kind of always think of my kids, and when we're trick-or-treating, they really don't have a set goal when they're heading out of the house. They're going to walk around the neighborhood, but at each corner, they stop and they make that cost-benefit analysis. They look right, they look left. Whichever direction has the most lights on, that's it. And fundamentally, that's a cost-benefit an analysis that they're making. And so some of that I want to tie into MD&A and the use of the concept of quarterly highlights. Guy had given me the feedback previously about the concept of 30 to 40% of CFOs who he test marketed the concept of quarterly highlights and use of. And to me, I felt that was a little low. More so just because I'm a bit more embedded into the making the changes. So I kind of think, geez, if we're going to make these changes, it'd be great if we had more buy-in. But I think it's just our nature, right? And it's a bit of the nature of our marketplace. Times are tough. We don't really want to learn too much new or go out and do too much that's really going to take up resources either that we don't have or money that we don't have. So in terms of the why we undertook this project, a bit of the background, we've been working on this project for greater than 5 years. So funny enough, this project started the year we got the Olympics. But the project itself, we believed in, and we pitched it to the rest of the country on the basis that we constantly heard venture issuers saying, look, you don't understand our marketplace, and you gear rules to the bigger population, and there's never a focus on venture issuers. And we always said, well, don't worry, there's always specific carve-outs in our rules that said, okay, venture issuers don't have to do this, don't have to do that. But the big feedback was, why don't you design rules of what venture issuers should do rather than just telling them, oh, you don't have to do this and don't have to do that. So we started out with a project. The original design was to make a kind of an all-encompassing venture issuer rule. However, that got to be a bit troublesome when we started to put it out for concept and get feedback. People started to say, I like that, don't like that, don't like that, like that. That the overall kind of concept of a venture issuer rule really didn't make sense. So we pared it back. And again, we kept trying to think of things that would be more suited to our marketplace of venture issuers, both here, Alberta, where there's a much more robust venture marketplace. So we tried to then switch gears to more targeted changes. So what were the things that really made sense to all venture issuers, and they were kind of unanimous? And that's where we got to the concept of a more streamlined MD&A getting rid of some of the bar thresholds and impetus that business acquisition reporting put on issuers. And so that's where we kind of ended up with. And certainly we're trying to recognize the state of development for venture issuers and really what the market is expecting from venture issuers. So the whole overreaching thing was to reduce burden and still have that layer of investor protection sitting out there. So the biggest area that I think we've done, other than the simple one, which is the business acquisition reporting, which to me, I've kind of always joked, there's two things that keep me in business at the commissions: business acquisition reports, and there's one aspect of information circulars. But other than that, I think from an investor perspective and company perspective, MD&A and the introduction of quarterly highlights, we think is a big benefit to the street. And it's the area where we kind of, when we're doing our reviews, when we're developing new aspects to the rules, issuers are really saying to us, you're not targeting these venture issuers. So, let's start again. So we've come up with the quarterly highlights. Concept is tailored and focused to venture issuers, focus on material information. Unfortunately, at the time, we felt it was best to introduce and roll out only for interim periods, and of course, it's optional. And one thing I wanted to comment on Guy's thing about larger venture issuers are encouraged to use the full form. The larger venture issuers, when we're thinking about that in concept, being encouraging to use the greater form, it's those that actually have a much more complicated business with various revenue streams. There's a few venture issuers in both the Alberta and Quebec marketplace that are very significant. And in fact, they could actually probably be the top third of the TSX in that kind of realm of population, but they've always stayed in the venture issuer side. There's a couple really, really big oil and gas producers. So there we're kind of saying, well, it probably doesn't make sense for you guys to be down in that realm of quarterly highlights when you have such a sophisticated business with revenue coming from various streams. So the expectations for quarterly highlights, really where to start. And I think this is probably the area that I get the most questions on. Everyone kind of saying conceptually, yeah, this seems to make sense, but how do I do it? Philosophically, I always say kind of where do you start? Always remember the goal of MD&A, and that's to see the company through the eyes of management. Where's the company? How did it get where it got to, and where's it going? Keys to success. I chuckle. Short, focused discussion. I'm not one to throw out the thing of 4 pages, but I may have given Guy kind of the guideline. It doesn't seem odd to me that you couldn't be able to do it in 4 pages. So now 4 pages is stuck. So, but hopefully when he gets up on the stand, he'll forget who he heard that from. But conceptually, I think when we talked about it in the theory, Guy said to me rightfully, "What do you think?" And I said, geez, I don't know. We've debated this internally as what are our expectations. And many see it could even be shorter for companies either with a very small work program on a limited property. Yeah, 4 pages might even be a little long. A CPC that's just out there hunting and waiting for its project could be 1 page. But I think the concept is try not to hit the length in saying, well, I got to pare it back to 4 pages, but think about it in using the free form to get in the concept of changing the way you focus on your MD&A and being able to write it in your own words without going through 1.1 all the way to 1.15. And I think that's really the goal here. Of course, we always say be balanced and accurate, and that should be in all of your disclosure. But sometimes, balance tends to get a bit slighted towards the positive. But that's just nature, and I don't think you want to be. I'm not saying be too negative, but certainly do the balance of the positives and the negatives, and be narrative. Like the whole concept is to try to get away from a regurgitation numbers that are already in the financial statements that people can figure out. So how will success be measured? For our purposes, we're not really looking at it to say, okay, going back to the old concept, have they hit all 15 areas of 1.1, 1.5? There's really 6 areas that are outlined in the requirements. They're very broad, but very specific. So I think, from my perspective, when my staff looks at it and says, "Oh, geez, I think this MD&A is really, really bad. It misses the mark on 1.5 disclosure, on 1.8 disclosure." I always say, can an investor understand the business? So that's really the test, and I think that should be the goal that a company comes to the start line with, is what are we trying to do? We're really trying to get investors or potential investors to understand our business. The concept of update versus outlook. Update, it's just numbers. Take the numbers, fit them into either our table or spreadsheet that we have from last quarter, update it, move on. Well, again, we're really trying to get away from that and trying to go to more of an outlook. Reading the MD&A, well, I know where your company's going in the next 12 months. And also operating milestones. What are you trying to achieve? And I think from an investor perspective, that's what we're looking to see portrayed from issuers. And also liquidity and capital resources, a very sensitive issue now in today's environment. We recognize the struggles that issuers are having, both in raising capital and operating in the environment. But when I put the concept of liquidity and capital resources up, it's just to avoid the concept where a company has a $500,000 property payment in the next 12 months, but there's no discussion of how they're going to come up with that $500,000 or $50,000 or $100,000. So it's not really saying anything other than, if you got the milestone and you have capital resources that are going to be required to be used in the next 12 months, say something about it. So this is where I'm trying to answer some of the questions. Why no template or examples? Clearly, we wanted to avoid the concept of getting into more specific templates, and that because we find every issuer is different. And when we started this project, it was on the voice that everyone said, look, don't treat every issuer the same. We're all different. We all have different milestones. We have different operating environments. Even in the mining sector, we could all be in exploration, but we're in different parts of the world. We're in different operating environments. So for us, we're really trying to avoid templates or examples. And that's for no other reason than not saying, set the bar and then just have everyone hit that bar, irrespective if it works for their company or not. Consequences for trying and not getting it right. Very big concept right now. Are we as regulators out there to set new rules and then just tell you when you got it wrong? This, again, the success of the venture issuer and the quarterly highlights really depends on issuers trying. And for our purposes, what we're looking for is effort. Much like I tell my 10-year-old, it's not going to be the mark you get, but it's going to be the effort you put in. And we're really committed to try to make it a much more of a longer road for issuers to allow them the runway to try a few different things and try to evolve their MD&A into the right things. Because fundamentally, the purpose of the rule is not to just shrink that 12 pages down to 10, down to 9. It's really to throw out the 12, start again, and build up. And so certainly you can expect many more prospective comments for changes in the next go round. So if you tried in Q1 and you don't quite get it right, our intention is to really come out with prospective comments. Say, you kind of, you're partway there. Here's how we'd like to see a little more beefed up. And that kind of leads into the concept of the build versus decommission. So many issuers, when they're looking at this going, okay, well, I got to get rid of my 12 pages. Maybe I can shave off 2 by taking this table or this paragraph out. And I really think you're best suited for success in kind of getting into this world of using tailored disclosure to build from the bottom up. It may be problemful for you early on, just because you got to rethink things. And right now it's easier just to plug the numbers in. But I think in terms of a benefit both to your company into having to bit of a navel gaze of what we're doing, where are our operational milestones, where do we want to say we're trying to go, it's probably easier to build than it is to decommission and just take that 12 pages and try to hive off 3 or 4. And then remember why the changes were made. And I think that this gets to a bit of the fear out there is that, do I really want to invite more problems from the regulatory side? What we're really trying to do is take that fundamental shift in the way we think on regulation, is to say we're listening to issuers, and issuers say, give us a different way of doing this. And we find MD&A is not useful for us as we produce it right now. It's not useful to the street as they read it. And no one really pays attention to the details. Is that we're trying to say, well, let's try to come up with a better way. And as we filter down, if it becomes beneficial and we start to see real gravitation towards this venture issuer quarterly highlights, we may see that as an impetus to put it in for bigger issuers. We really kind of want to get the thought pattern of companies being able to have a little more leeway to say it in their own words, and to be able to go out there and say what they're doing, where they're going, and how they got to specific points in their own words, and not be just form driven. So a reminder on timing, quarterly highlights you can use for fiscal years beginning on or after July 1st. So many calendar year companies will start in their March 2016 quarters is the first one. So, that might be beneficial into itself, is that the early adopters might be the June year ends. So maybe you'll start to see some. We haven't obviously seen any yet. But the presumption is we'll start to see the first ones maybe in November. So keep an eye for that, and hopefully we can also keep in contact with the marketplace, saying, well, here's some that we're seeing, and they're a good effort. All right, I think there's not going to be any silver bullet on how these play out to be the best or the acceptable. I think at a certain point we want issuers to try and get into something that at the end of the day is not just, we met the test. It's really giving you the power to say, I don't want to waste time on MD&A going through 1.15 each category. I just want to say what I'm doing, and I'm doing some exploration. Here's my milestones. Here's how I think I'm going to get there. Audit committees, all of that, new rules start effective years beginning on or after Jan 1, 2016. And the filing deadlines for exec comp again for fiscal years starting on July 1st, 2015. Regulatory focus, I just put some areas here that we cover off in a staff notice, and that's 51344. It's probably a good document to call up. It's on our website. It gives you a bit more flavor of areas that we tackled in our last fiscal year. MD&A, liquidity and capital resources, obviously results of operations, forward-looking information. Non-GAAP measures was something I wanted to highlight. We're revamping our non-GAAP measures notice, which will try to reflect some new guidance in IFRS 1. So we're hoping to have that staff notice updated by the end of the year, if not early 2016. Guy touched on related party disclosure. One other thing that we're noticing is CEO, CFO certification, where there's an inconsistency between certificate language and then the MD&A disclosure. Topical areas on the financial statements, operating segments. Really, in that aspect, it's just an inconsistency between other disclosure and the financial statements. So what we'll find sometimes, people kind of go, how do you come up with a comment on operating segments? We'll go to the MD&A and it'll say, well, we're in these 4 countries and we do these different things. Then we'll go to the financial statements as we're in one segment and just mining. So geographically, we're in one, Canada, but we'll find operations all around the world. So business combinations, not a whole lot here. I think in some of the things we've highlighted, it was allocation of purchase price to goodwill and intangibles. So where we thought maybe there was some on the technology side there was some apparent intangibles that purchase price wasn't allocated towards. Fair value measurements, obviously an area that's always ongoing, and impairment of assets. That's going to be an unfortunate byproduct of our financial marketplace and where we are in the mining sector right now.